Today, I want to talk to you about managing your speech anxiety. The majority of people have some level of speech anxiety, so please don't feel that you're alone or unique in this experience. Almost everybody experiences, like I said, a level of stage fright or anxiety. Even myself, even doing recordings to myself here in my house, I feel a level of anxiety. I want to get it right. I want it to be done correctly. I want to appear competent. So even someone who's an experienced speaker, even someone who isn't speaking to an audience can feel some anxiety. So it's completely understandable if you're feeling nervous about giving your speeches at home, in front of a classroom, in front of family, in front of strangers. Anything can cause some anxiety because your grade may be on the line, or if you're not giving a speech for this class or for a grade, just your reputation and the way that people perceive you. So it makes sense if you're feeling nervous about your speeches. There's two different types of anxiety. The first is facilitative, and it means a certain amount of nervousness can be helpful. I think at this stage in my career, my anxiety is facilitative because when I start to feel a little bit anxious about giving a speech or presenting in front of a classroom or my peers, that energy amps me up. It gets me in the zone, in the mood for giving a speech. And so I can channel that nervous energy into excitement and positivity, hand gestures, facial expressions, variance in my voice, all of that anxiety, that energy comes out in that way because I've trained myself to use it like that. Now, when I first started as a speech instructor, it might surprise you to know that I had debilitative anxiety. In fact, I feel so sorry for my first classes that I ever taught because I spent the majority of the time in the classroom, in person, with 25 people sitting in front of me, hunched behind a computer with the PowerPoint up behind me, clicking through the PowerPoint, basically just reading what was on the PowerPoint and avoiding making any kind of eye contact with students whatsoever. My classes were scheduled to be about 50 minutes long, and I usually dismissed students after 20 minutes because I would go through a slide, I'd say, "Everybody okay?" And no one would say anything, and then I'd just move on to the next slide. I was way too nervous to try to facilitate a discussion or answer questions or anything like that. In fact, I dreaded students asking questions because I wasn't confident that I would have the correct answers, and then I felt like they would immediately see me for the fraud that I felt myself to be, and they would judge me, and they would tell my professor who I was working under, and I just, I knew that my whole thing was going to crumble. So that's an intense level of apprehension that results in a poor performance. And a lot of you, I'm sure, have some debilitative anxiety as well. And so I want to talk you through what I did to overcome that and what your book discusses to do to overcome that, because it is possible to work through that and find a way to make that nervous energy facilitative rather than debilitative. So why do we have debilitative anxiety? A lot of it can come from past negative experience. If you think about the movie Talladega Nights with Ricky Bobby, it's one of my favorite movies of all times. He has this terrible experience. He's a race car driver, excellent at what he does, and then he has this bad experience. He gets into a really nasty wreck and his car catches on fire and he ends up going to the hospital. And after that, it's almost impossible for him to get back in the car and to do the thing that he loves because he's had this negative experience. And it's, a really pretty funny scene of all the different things that he has to do to try to overcome this anxiety that he has about getting back in a race car. But we often experience that ourselves. If you've had a bad experience with public speaking where people laughed at you, or maybe no one laughed at you, maybe you perceived that people were laughing at you, maybe you thought you were doing a good job on the speech, but you made a poor grade if it was for another class or some kind of presentation. And so lots of different things can get in your mind where you think that you didn't do well or you actually did not do well. And that can then start to bury deep inside you. The other one is irrational thinking. This is what I suffered from when I first was speaking in front of groups, in front of the classroom. So we call these fallacies. They're just illogical things that we tell ourselves. And so it's very much about talking yourself through these kinds of things. So The fallacy of catastrophic failure was certainly one that I perceived. In my mind, I thought, again, if I didn't deliver a good lecture to students, that they would automatically know that I didn't know what I was doing, that I wasn't a good professor. They would tell the professor I was working under, I would lose my job. Like, I just spiraled out on that. I also suffered from, and still often suffer from, the fallacy of perfection, that I have to do everything exactly right or people will judge me. And it's difficult to overcome these ideas, but again, it's really all about self-talk. It's about the messages that you tell yourself. And so when I find my mind spiraling out in that way, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to do something wrong. People are going to call me out. It's going to be a conflict. I try to tell myself, take a breath. That's probably not going to happen. Okay. If it does happen, if a student reported me to a supervisor and said I was doing a poor job, I will handle that. I'm capable of addressing that issue, and I'm capable of improving. So to me, that goes along with trying to dispel the fallacy of perfection and that people expect perfection of us. So I tell myself and I tell students all the time, no one actually expects perfection of you. Do you expect perfection of everyone around you? Probably not. You're probably very forgiving of people making mistakes. If you saw a fellow student giving a speech and they stumbled over their words, it's likely that you're not even going to think that much about it. Or it might even make you feel relief, like, oh, good, they made a mistake because I know I'm going to make a mistake. And now we're all in the same boat making mistakes together. So it's very rare that people expect you to be perfect or hold you to a standard of perfection. And yet we hold ourselves to a standard of perfection sometimes. So it's helpful for me to give myself a more positive message, which is that I don't have to be perfect. I'm human. It's okay to make mistakes. Even though I'm a speech instructor, I'm going to make mistakes in my speech presentations. I'm sure you've heard some already, or maybe you haven't heard them, but they're there, I assure you. And I need to let it go and know that it's okay to not be perfect and to make some mistakes because it's a normal experience. The others are fallacy of approval, which I would say I somewhat have suffered from because I think on a deep level for most of us, we want other people to like us. We want to be seen as competent, as knowing what we're doing, and of giving a message that other people will agree with. We want other people to agree with us. So this fallacy of approval is that you have to put a message out that doesn't offend anyone, doesn't hurt anyone's feelings, doesn't make people want to disagree with you or engage you in conflict. And I will do that as well. Sometimes I'll think about, oh, was the example that I gave a good example? Or what if that example makes somebody mad or hurts their feelings? And I have to remember that all I can do is my best. And I can't please everybody all the time. I can please some people some of the time, and that's just about it. And I have to let the rest go and know that, again, I'm a fallible human and I'm going to make mistakes. The last is the fallacy of overgeneralization. To me, this is the easiest one to dispel from your mind. Overgeneralization is using terms like categorical terms like always, never, every time. So to say like, I'm always terrible at everything, that's obviously an overgeneralization. You are not always bad at anything. So I think that one's a real easy one to reprogram in your mind to stop saying those categorical terms, remove terms like always, never, every time, all of the time, that sort of thing. Remove those from your language. Again, give yourself permission and grace to be imperfect, just as you would give that grace to other people. You don't expect others to be perfect, so try not to expect yourself to do that as well. And know that whatever happens in the speech is going to be okay. So I've went through a couple of these as well. This is what your book talks about. Use nervousness to your advantage. So again, try to think about that nervous energy as a way to make your voice louder, to stand taller, to use more gestures or more expressions. Try to mentally understand the difference between rational and irrational fears. If you do not prepare for your speech at all, you wait until 15 minutes before it's due and you try to throw something together, that's a pretty rational fear that you're going to do a bad job. So you probably should be worried at that point. But if you do everything that you should, you pick your topic, you write your outline, you practice multiple times, it's probable that you're going to be okay. And so you want to then dispel those irrational fears and say, again, it's okay to make mistakes. It doesn't have to be perfect, just has to do the best that I can. I've given it my all, and that's all that can be expected of me. The third recommendation is to maintain a receiver orientation. So instead of thinking about yourself and what everyone is seeing and what everyone is judging, try to think about what they're hearing. What message do you want to give to your audience? How can you put them at ease? How can you relate to them? So try to think about the audience instead of thinking about yourself. Keep a positive attitude. Again, it's a lot of mental work preparing for a speech. There's the actual work of preparing for a speech, but mentally, you want to keep a positive attitude. If you're always telling yourself, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to practice, I'm going to work hard, then you're going to likely do fine. Your book recommends a strategy called visualization, which is picturing yourself giving a successful speech. And I think that's a very effective means of keeping a positive attitude. Don't picture yourself failing. Picture yourself succeeding. What I find very helpful, in addition to visualization, is to actually write out a paragraph in the present tense. So I'm preparing for my speech, then I'm writing my note cards, I'm practicing with my note cards. Now I'm at the classroom, I'm giving my speech. Students are nodding their heads, they're smiling, they laugh at my corny jokes, and the class period ends and everyone leaves and it's fine. So, just writing out a very short scenario and reading that to yourself can sometimes reprogram your brain and get rid of those negative messages we're telling ourselves. And then lastly, the very best thing that you can do to dispel your anxiety is just be prepared. I've said that through this whole time, is actually prepare for the speech. And if you do that, again, chances are you're going to do fine.